Our guest in this hour is Michael O'Connell AM, a consulting victimologist. Michael has served as the inaugural Commissioner for Victims' Rights in South Australia from 2006 to 2018. Before that, he served as the state's first Victims of Crime Coordinator, and while employed as a police officer, he was appointed the state's first Victim Impact Statement Coordinator. I should be getting you to read this. He held many other positions, including with the United Nations. He's a lecturer and a writer in the field of victimology and criminal justice, as well as journal editor, for example, the Journal of Victimology and Victim Justice. Tonight, he joins us as the recently appointed victim advocate for Second Chances South Australia. Michael O'Connell, welcome to the Sunday Night Talk studio.
Good evening to you, good evening to your listeners, and thank you for making the time, since we made time such an issue with the opening comments.
Well, it's lovely to have you, and as I said to listeners earlier, they can't see you, although I think there is a camera in here somewhere. There's cameras everywhere nowadays, hey?
Yes,
but your face is familiar from the newspaper and from television reports and when you've spoken, so on, and so it's lovely to see you face to face. And we ought to, just to save offence, we ought to welcome also the thingamabob. What are you, the managing director or something of?
It was International Women's Day the other day.
Yes, I know.
You got yourself into deep trouble here.
But it's not now, so I don't have to live by those rules.
It's just too bad. I'm the Chief Executive Officer.
Chief Executive Officer of Second Chances. And it's lovely to have you too, Helen Glanville.
I don't know how you put up with him, Lorraine.
Well, he makes me laugh. That was one of the stories that we heard earlier.
Yes, what she means is I'm a laughing matter. It's lovely to have you with us tonight, Helen.
Thank you very
so
much.
Why don't we start with you and then pass back to Michael?
I was happy to give him the microphone.
Yeah, but I need to ask you, why have you appointed a victim's advocate to join Second Chances South Australia?
Because the children of prisoners are the victims, the innocent victims of crime.
Mm-hmm.
The innocent, the invisible and the hidden victims of crime.
Okay. So what?
They are very important because they are all research has shown that they are 7 times more likely to go to prison than any other group in the community. That's so what?
Okay.
Wow. Okay. Let's get it straight. Why don't we?
You asked.
I love you, Helen.
I know.
But why an advocate?
Because these children need to have a voice. They are voiceless. Okay. And they have a stigma, and they are bullied, and they are teased, and they're often forgotten and overlooked. The public is generally completely unaware, and to have someone of Michael's knowledge and calibre wave the flag and fly the flame of hope for them is extremely important for the children of prisoners.
So, Michael, how do you feel about that appointment?
Well, it's a really important appointment to hold. For many people in the public at large, the concept of prisoners' children being a victim of crime is challenging. Mm-hmm. Some very readily accept because they, for example, have situations that they're familiar with where a father has perpetrated crime against his own children and he goes to prison, and so everyone goes, well, they quite clearly are victims of crime, and the services that are made available to them are quite readily available, whether it be through child protection services or if they're a bit older, rape and sexual assault service or something similar. They have access to state-funded victim compensation as the direct victims of that crime. But as the relationship between the actual perpetrator, the parent, and the child, in a criminal sense, becomes more distant, those people become less and less obvious. And we know that if for example, the primary breadwinner in a family goes to prison, then that can mean that family, the family outside of the prison, become homeless. They're not able to afford so many of the basic things that we take for granted, many of us in our lives. As Helen just said, that many of those people, then we put them onto a pathway that the likelihood of them becoming both antisocial and then ultimately a criminal is significantly greater.
So what we seem to be saying there is that the community easily sees the victimisation at the point of a crime, which then causes the person to go to jail, but we fail to see the ongoing victimisation of that child because of what's happened earlier. It fades a bit, does it?
Well, if a child is the direct victim of a parent's crime, so, for example, I assault a son or a daughter, then the public at large say, well, that poor child, they are quite clearly a victim of a crime. The sorts of effects that my imprisonment have on that person who is more readily accepted as a victim of crime are similar to the sorts of effects that happen to families where the child is not the direct victim of the prisoner, but the prisoner's gone off to prison.
And that's what we're not seeing.
And they're the people we don't see. They are the people who are invisible.
So, for example, I rob a bank and get sent to prison. We don't then think of my children.
That's exactly
okay.
It. And those people, you rob a bank, you go to prison. If you were the primary person bringing income into the home, that means that there is no income, no money coming to pay mortgages, to buy food, to pay for school fees, to cover medical expenses, whatever it happens to be. And as a consequence of that, the ramifications are quite significant. And an organisation such as Second Chances has recognised that, and they're working in a space which is not readily understood by most people in the community.
In reading the article in the Advertiser from Sunday, February 24, I think it was, there's also reference to things like bullying at school because the child's parent or parents are in prison, that there's a lot of negative action and reaction around that child. So much so I think that one child actually had to be completely moved out of a school because of the harassment and the bullying that took place. And I guess for me, I wouldn't have immediately seen that was going to happen. You know, I sort of separate, yes, that's the person who's perpetrated the crime, that's what they've done, so they're being punished. But I wouldn't have seen this ongoing negative effect that happens in society to, as you say, these children who are now the victims of what has happened, even if they're not the direct victims because of the crime itself. They are the indirect victims because of the resulting behaviour of society or reaction of society even.
So one of the cases that I referred to in the Advertiser article involved a father who murdered someone, and so the child became not the innocent child, but the child of the murderer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your dad is a horrible man. He killed this person. Turn up at school and someone says to the child, your dad's the killer, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And so that child had to live with that stigma.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a consequence of that constant sort of attack, and it's an attack that just gradually eats away and wears away at that person, then one of the risks is that they'll just isolate themselves. They'll drop out of school. It means
so their future is seriously damaged then?
Jeopardised. Jeopardised as a consequence of our, broadly as a community, willingness to accept that the crime of that parent has ramifications for those innocent children.
Yes.
So, Michael, what are you actually going to do? I mean, it's a nice title, but what does it mean in practical terms?
Well, in practical terms, it means that if we take government policy, for example, and decisions around funding, that one of my functions will be to ensure that whenever there is an opportunity, that I step up and put, if you like, a voice, give these children a voice, look at ways that we may be able to improve their circumstances. At this stage, it's not my role to be intimately involved in the programs, but these programs rely on members of the community being prepared to be engaged. So rely on people being prepared to provide some sort of sponsorship. And those things come with having someone who's prepared to go out, knock on doors, talk to people, speak at Probers Club, service clubs, talk on radio as we're doing this evening, and try and ensure that the message is consistent, that it's strong, and that hopefully in the not too distant future, returning back to the concept of time, we'll be able to, as a broad community, accept the fact that there is no corporate responsibility for the sins of their parents.
So would you find yourself in the courtroom for court cases of parents of children or anything? Would that be an advocacy issue?
Well, there's always a possibility that, for example, the children of a person who is about to go to prison may have a particular view. Certainly here in South Australia, where victim impact statements, you mentioned I was the coordinator of those, victim impact statements can be made on behalf of anyone who is affected by crime. Our law is quite broad. It doesn't use the word victim in the ordinary narrow sense of the person who actually suffers as a consequence of the direct actions of someone. What's more, our Victims of Crime Act says that a victim is anyone who's harmed as a consequence of a crime except the actual perpetrator. So we have a couple of pieces of law that accept that prisoners' children could be victims of crime. What we don't have is someone who steps up, who talks for those people, who ensures that if they have something to say that they can be heard.
So though it's recognised in the law, it's not actually yet being practically outworked to say these people are also victims, and you're stepping up for that position.
Well, we've seen broadly the public at large, for example, awareness begin to improve now around people who are adult survivors of child sexual abuse. For years, some of those people came forward and asked for help, and they were just ignored.
But now it's a crime to ignore it.
Now it's a crime to ignore it. So over a period of time, with continual advocacy, and we mentioned before International Women's Day. Well, I need to point out here in Australia that in the last 3 to 4 decades, one of the reasons that we have so many advances in the area of victims' rights is largely because of the women's movement. In the 70s and early 80s, they decided they weren't going to sit around in their sheds and just mope around. They were going to be out on the streets. They were going to be knocking on politicians' doors. They were going to be talking to people who write the law and reform procedures within government departments. Quite clearly, it took 3 to 4 decades to bring us to where we are now. South Australia is one of the leaders in the world in the victims' rights, victim assistance area. Maybe in my lifetime I will see some improvement when it comes to the lives of prisoners' children. We all should live with some sense of hope. That's what's important.
Michael's terminology of South Australia punching above its weight. When I was in the presence of the former Attorney-General, I said to him, you can make this state the leading light of the nation. And soon after that, we were awarded our Gold Award from the Australian Institute of Criminology for the early intervention crime prevention that we're doing for the children of prisoners. We've gone another step. We have been in this arena for 10.5 years with children in this state, and when they finish school, we haven't got any more programs for them. And that is something that has really been quite disturbing to my heart, because we know that from 18 through to 30, all sorts of curveballs can be thrown at us in life, and they need more support.
That age also can be very formative, can't it?
It can be very formative. So I have been paddling hard underwater in lobbying the federal government. You see, we have no federal prison system, right? They don't even have a federal policy on the children of prisoners. And I'm working towards that. One of our outcomes will be we are going to influence the nation for these children. The thing is, we've just been awarded a considerable grant for a project called Getting Ready for Takeoff, and I've just come away from a 48-hour period with 12 young people who we've known over, most of them over 10 years, and we have now the capacity to give them a life coach and hope for vocational education.
Wow.
And that really spins my wheels. It's one thing to help the children and support them and give them the strengthening factors, and most of all keep them in school, because the moment you start truanting, guess what happens? Research says that's the beginning of the downhill slide. Antisocial behaviour and all that goes in with it. We are now in a position for the next 15 months till June 2020 to provide these kids and pay for their vocational education. So money isn't going to be an issue anymore, and we're going to put some coaching around them. I am right on the cusp of employing 2 life coaches.
Wow, that's awesome.
We've divided Adelaide into the north and the south. Why have we done this? We've done it because we know where the postcodes are where they live. We have kept our secure CRM, our database indicates the exact LGAs, the local government areas where they live, and they're mostly in the south and the north. And That's why we're opening offices in Morford Vale and Elizabeth, because that's where most of our clientele live, and we want to open the door to them so we can, even just building their confidence, like a barista course, a little certificate, they've got something, then a first aid course, or maybe a life-saving course, maybe getting them legal on the roads with the proper driver's licence. We want them to be safe. We want the community to be safe. So we want them to have all the hindrances that someone like Twiggy over in Western Australia faces with adults trying to get them employed are the same hindrances and barriers for young kids. So often they don't have a licence, their literacy and numeracy is low, they don't have a ticket, they have health issues, or they have a life-controlling issue with drugs. Or
they just have a history of seeing unemployment.
Correct, and they don't understand that there's rewards for work. There are good rewards, and it's not impossible. So we believe in early intervention. If we can get in early and put these kids on a vocational pathway that's of their choosing, something that, we're all born with something that can be something of passion that we enjoy doing, and we're in the business of finding that and helping them find that.
Michael O'Connell, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we look forward to hearing major achievements as a result of what you're doing.
Thank you very much to you and to your listeners, and let's hope we've stirred up a little bit of interest among those people who are listening to us.
And for those that are interested, Helen, before we let you go, can you give us some contact details for Second Chances?
Yes, our website is secondchances.org.au.
It's easy.
And the phone number is 8272 0323, but there's more. Next Sunday night on Channel 9, South Aussie with Cozzy at 5:30 is going to play our 11-minute video that you can also find on the website.
Wow, incredible.
That's great.
Well done.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
Cozzy's a fan, and so we're thrilled because he's come to the conclusion it's not their fault.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thanks so much to both of you for being with us from Second Chances, and we do look forward to hearing the big announcements in the next month.